And so hello and welcome everyone to part two of our cyber risk management webinar series, from preparation to restoration. So today, as I said, is part two, which will be on managing the cyber claims process. I'm Tom O'Neill. I'm the management liability and cyber specialist here at Fred C. Church, and I'll be your host today. Our guest is Anthony Howley, Chief Operating Officer at Evolve MGA. Evolve is a cybersecurity insurance carrier focused on protecting businesses from hacking attacks. Anthony, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Tom. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. So that was a pretty modest introduction of you. So I'm sure you could tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do at Evolve.
Sure. Yeah. So my name's Anthony Howley, COO for Evolve. I have been with the company pretty much since inception, so almost 7 years now. Worked as an underwriter and just kind of navigated my way up the ladder as the company began to grow and expand. So currently do everything from overseeing systems and working with our director of technology, working with our underwriting team leaders and implementing and initiating various underwriting initiatives on the cyber side, working with our risk management vendors. So the vendors on the pre-breach or post-breach remediation side, as well as working with our claims team, specifically the cyber claims manager, and ensuring that we oversee the claims handling process for our clients and really just make sure it goes smoothly and they get everything they need to remediate the event and get them back up and running as quickly as possible.
Awesome. So you got a couple things on your plate, I suppose.
A little bit of everything, yeah.
Well, obviously you're the perfect speaker for our topic today, which is about managing the cyber claims process. So we're excited to have you and dig into it a little bit. Just for everyone here, please chat your questions. We'll try and monitor as we go and leave a little bit of time at the end for questions, but please chat those questions and we'll try and answer them. So as I said, this is part two in our 4-part webinar series discussing cyber claims, everything from preparation to restoration. So this part two here really gets at the heart of why we came up with this 4-part series. We want you all to understand what it's like to go through a claim, the players involved, what your role is, so that if that happens, you have a bit of an understanding. So, an important thing to be thinking about. All right, so as I said, this is a 4-part. In our first episode in the series, we talked about what an incident response plan was and how that's important to how you prepare for the inevitable breach. So, Anthony, can you tell us, as someone who sees these claims every day, what advantage does the company who has an incident response plan, what advantages do they have, as they face a claim?
Yeah, for sure. Good question. So incident response plans definitely vital to helping survive a cyber attack. I'd say the biggest thing you're looking at there is you're prepared. You understand what you're going to need to do in the event of a cyber incident. So preparation's key. We are seeing a lot of cyber markets require these for certain risks, especially when covering entities with like a higher business interruption or business income loss exposure. So thinking about a manufacturer, if they went down, the amount of money they're losing while they're down because they're not manufacturing that product or upholding those contracts, right? So an incident response plan, it's essentially a playbook, instructions designed to help companies prepare for, detect, respond to, and recover from a cyber attack. So the whole kit and caboodle. Going through a cyber attack, like ransomware attacks, we're having those all the time right now. Very scary, very stressful. So having that incident response plan in place is just going to better prepare a business for that type of event. You're going to know who in your business, whose role is what, who needs to do what in order to help mitigate the event. People are often going to panic. You don't know where to turn, right? But if you have a hard copy of your incident response plan, you can pull it out, go through the necessary steps, now knowing that you're handling things the appropriate way. I would also even encourage people, once they have their incident response plan built out, to contact a cybersecurity vendor and try to organize a roundtable where you actually practice a fake cyber attack. You follow the incident response plan, you ensure everyone is comfortable with the process. Now, every cyber event's going to be unique, so you always need to know it's not going to be like perfect and it's not going to be like really smooth every single time. But again, just that preparedness and that understanding of what is going to happen and how you need to handle that event is key. And the incident response plan, the IR plan, is going to help you through that process. So additionally, if you have a cyber insurance policy, a lot of the times your cyber insurer should be holding your hand through that process, but they can reference the incident response plan with you and ensure that you're doing things in line with it, because not every incident response plan is the exact same. They're going to be unique to your business and where you guys have your data stored, how your backups work, what systems you use. So all of that is going to be taken into account in that incident response plan. And then it'll say, Tom O'Neill does this, Anthony Howley does this, right? So we all have designated roles and we have an understanding of what our obligation is in the event of a cyber event. And then one last tidbit there. If your client is an Evolve policyholder, considering being an Evolve policyholder, I do have a nice little worksheet, kind of a template to help insureds build an incident response plan. So if that's ever needed, you can reach out to Tom, or you can reach out to myself or our email riskmanagement@evolvemga.com, and we can relay that over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, having those templates is a great tool for, if you don't have one, it's going to help you get maybe 75, 80% of the way there without recreating the wheel. So you talked about how an incident response plan kind of identifies who does what, right? So that's like, internally, who does what in your company when that breach occurs. There's also, an element of who does what in response to a breach from a vendor standpoint. So like all these different players that are going to need to come in and help you respond to a breach. So can you give us an idea, and this is really, kind of the key point, right? And Anthony, you and I have talked about this, like how important it is to have a quarterback in your claims or in your insurance carrier who's going to help quarterback and include all of these different vendors that help you respond to a breach. So can you kind of take us through what it's like for a client to go through a breach and how the insurance carrier and specifically the claims department helps coordinate the vendors that you're going to need in order to respond to a breach?
Yeah, of course. We'll probably just use a ransomware event as the example here. That's the number one claim we're seeing across the board. I think everybody's pretty familiar with that by now, but someone clicks on a link or an attachment in an email, which releases some sort of malware into your system. And then eventually that thing creeps throughout your servers, throughout your network. It can get into other machines. It can get into your cloud storage even sometimes, and eventually locks you out. So maybe people come in on Monday and they try to access certain files or data and they're locked out, right? As soon as you see that incident or you think you're having some sort of a malicious attack, I strongly encourage everyone to call the 24/7 hotline. Almost every cyber insurer has one. At Evolve, we have a little mobile app where you can file claims as well. I encourage the 24/7 hotline because people like to talk to someone, right? So you call that 24/7 hotline. It's going to put you in touch with a call center where someone's going to immediately take down notes about the event, what's happening to you guys, right? From there, they're going to relay those notes over to an IT forensic vendor. And the IT forensic guys, they're not your IT company. They're not meant to replace your MSP or your managed service provider or your IT person if it's internal. They're there to work with them, right? But these guys are the cybersecurity experts, and they deal with threats all day, every day, right? So once they have that information, they're going to typically reach out to the insured or the contact who called that 24/7 hotline, usually within 30 minutes or less. So it's a very quick thing. From there, they're going to do all sorts of triage, right? So they're going to typically be able to do all of this remotely. If it's needed for them to be on site, they will go on site, but that's very rare these days, which is pretty cool that you can do a lot of this remotely. So They'll run various scans, deploy things like Sentinel-1 to really understand the nature of the incident and what their options are to mitigate the event. While they're running those scans, they're also going to be asking questions pertaining to what type of data are stored in certain files that were maybe accessed by the threat actor. So if any data containing PII, personally identifiable information like social security numbers, credit cards, etc., or PHI, protected healthcare information, which is arguably the most sensitive one. So any sort of healthcare record or healthcare data, if any of that has or maybe has been accessed, that's when legal counsel is also going to get involved. So legal counsel, the data breach attorneys, so they're going to be involved. They'll work with your IT forensic firm to really understand what data has been accessed. And then they're going to guide the insured regarding the notification and credit monitoring offering obligations. So you're obligated to notify and offer credit monitoring based on the state that person's domiciled in or country. So that can be a lot of rules and regulations to sift through, which again is why their involvement is really important from the data breach attorney side. For the IT forensics, going back to the ransomware event, we try to do everything we can to not pay the ransom. Unfortunately, we usually end up having to pay the ransom, or the insured pays it and we reimburse them, right? But when they're running those various scans to determine whether the insured's paying the ransom, they're going to try to see if that's going to expose them to one of the OFAC sanctions, which we'll dive into in a little bit more. It's important to note that ransoms are often negotiated down by the IT forensic team. So let's say you have a ransom for 400K. They're usually able to identify who the crime group is. And they've probably dealt with this crime group on past events because, again, this is what the IT forensic guys are doing all day. And maybe it's 400 grand and they're go, you know what, let's negotiate it down. They get it to 300 grand. Okay, cool. We exhaust all efforts, basically saying the insured unfortunately didn't have good enough backups, or maybe we can restore a certain portion of the data, but not all the data. So in this case, we're going to recommend that you pay the ransom, right? Now, cyber carriers cannot pay the ransom directly. So this is where you're going to see the insured have to pay it, and then the cyber carrier will reimburse you. There have been a couple scenarios where the cyber or the insured didn't have the money to pay it. In those situations, that's where the cyber insurer will often have a third party front that money, and then we reimburse that third party. So there are ways around that. You just got to communicate that and make sure that it's known. From there, they connect the insured though to a crypto wallet company who will take that money, they convert it into a cryptocurrency, usually Bitcoin, and then they're going to pay the ransom. Once the ransom's paid, you have to remember that these ransomware attacks are not designed by Google or Apple, so they don't always work the way they say they're going to work, and that you pay the ransom and you could still have data that's corrupted. So that's, again, where the IT forensic team or potentially the claims adjuster, depending on the nature of the incident and what the insured does, they will bring in people to restore or rebuild certain data. We had one insured, an architecture firm, and they lost all their blueprints and they didn't have good backups. They thought their backups were working, they were not working. We brought in third-party architects to rebuild all of those blueprints, right? And that's covered usually under something called system damage or data restoration, right? So restoring that data that unfortunately was lost or corrupt, right? And again, even if you pay the ransom, don't expect to get all your data back. It can happen where you still have to rebuild things. So best scenario, again, not paying the ransom, try to exhaust every avenue before we pay it. But again, that usually requires the insured to have great backup procedures. So that's probably why you're going to see a lot of cyber markets really stress that, and that is increasing on the underwriting side. You can look into something like a 1, 2, 3 backup procedure to make sure you're backing up data 3 different ways. That way, if one gets affected, you have 2 others to fall back on, so on and so forth. And then, as I said, even when ransom is paid, systems are not always restored to the exact state they were at before, which requires the rebuilding of data. So that's really how a lot of those ransomware events are going to go. The goal is trying to react really quickly to it, because again, the longer the insured is down, the more your cyber market is on the hook for those business income losses, as well as even reputational harm, which in layman's terms is kind of like future lost sales. You get back up and running, but because that incident was so impactful, you are now losing customers, right? Which is thus in turn financially you're losing money, right? So again, cyber insurers, a good cyber product is going to have coverage for that. So it's in our best interest to get you back up and running as quickly as possible.
Well, I mean, I speak for myself, but probably most of our listeners. Whew,
A lot.
that is
Yeah.
quite the process.
Yeah,
So,
it's quite the process, right? And there's a lot of people involved there, right? A lot of vendors. So your claims adjuster is your quarterback on all that, right? So really lean in on the adjuster. If you feel the insured is not getting the help they need, you as a broker can reach out to that adjuster and really make sure you're helping them quarterback the situation and that the communication is staying in line.
yeah, absolutely. That's the value in, kind of the team approach. So, like at Fred C. Church, we have our own claims advocacy team, and they're ready to be, the client advocate in those situations. But of course, you need the quarterback at
Yep.
the insurance company as well.
Mhm.
I counted 7 different vendors that you pointed to just in that one claim scenario. And
Mhm.
that ransomware claim scenario is the classic example. So, I mean, that's what happens in most, ransomware is the leading cause of loss for cyber now. And you'll need probably 7 vendors to
Mhm.
work through that process. So
Yeah.
not only does the cyber insurance policy provide the coverage that pays for those things, but it also provides you with a network of vendors to gain access to. And that in itself holds pretty significant value, I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with that 100%. We do have certain brokers that have hit us up in the past who have a client that does not have a cyber policy, but they have a ransomware event. And they're like, what do we do? Well, we can still connect them to our network, but
Yeah,
it's way nicer to just have that. Oh, we have the policy in place. We know there's going to be coverage. You sleep well at night when you have that.
absolutely. That always helps. So while that process may feel overwhelming, the good news is that if you have the cyber policy, then this team of people is behind you, ready to step in and guide you through it. I want to hit on one more thing. So you talked about forensic analysts and reputational harm. Just so for the listeners here, that those are the subjects of the final 2 parts of our webinar series. So April 4th is the next one. That'll be all about forensic analysis. So we'll do a deep dive on that. And then reputational harm will be our 4th one. That one's yet to be scheduled, but you can look forward to a deep dive on that. So Anthony, you talked about, in that first call, forensic outset. We do some kind of loss mitigation on the back end because, we want to try and prevent the loss from getting worse. And apologies if my system disrupted there for a moment, but can you talk to us a little bit about what kind of loss mitigation happens like right from the outset of a claim? Like, is it possible to kind of head this off at the pass and maybe take what could be $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 claim and get out of it relatively unscathed?
Yeah, that's going to depend on the insured's preparedness for the event and really what they've put in place pre-breach, right? So there's kind of 2 things that we're stressing really hard right now in the underwriting process. And that's, or I should say 3 things actually. MFA, so having multi-factor authentication on basically every login, which is, I think hopefully everyone's familiar with that, but you log into something and your phone will get a push notification or some sort of code. So there's another way for them to say, yes, that is the user who's logging into this, right? Because hackers can run what's called a brute force attack. And if they have your username, they can guess passwords pretty quickly. And if there's MFA in place, they're still going to be locked out and not be able to get in there. So that's one good way to prevent that. The next one we talked about already was backups, right? So if you have that ransomware event and you have really good backups, the IT forensic firm will notice that, and they can often just roll your system back and you can almost act like nothing happened, right? Maybe you lose like a day of data, right? But that's not going to be detrimental to your business. So that can be really pivotal. And again, just because you're backing data up in the cloud doesn't mean it's 100% okay, right? We have seen ransomware strains get into cloud storage backups, right? So that's where looking into a 1, 2, 3 data backup process or procedures is really important, because you're backing up data into the cloud. You're maybe backing up data onto your own network, and then maybe you're backing up data into a external hard drive that you put in a fireproof safe. And maybe you do the latter one only weekly, right? Because it takes a little bit more effort, but either way, you have something you can fall back on. And then the third thing is employee education, right? So we have some risk management tools out there for our policyholders that help promote that. In fact, I'm working on a new vendor right now that's going to hopefully kick it into a whole nother gear. But educating your employees about phishing links, not clicking on attachments or links that seem scammy or weird. If you're not expecting an email, you should always have your guard up, right? Then you can also implement various software like Graphis or Mimecast, which are software tools for your email to help minimize the amount of phishing emails that are going to come through. So in terms of when we discover the event, what can we do to hopefully make it way less expensive? Again, react really quickly, right? Call that 24/7 hotline immediately, state your case and what's going on. And we will work as quickly as we can to minimize that event, because that is our goal as well. But the bigger thing is trying to do stuff on the pre-breach side with, again, the focus on MFA backups and employee education. And I could talk about securities and tools all day. There's way more than just that are going to help mitigate your exposure. But those are the key three that we're really trying to push and enforce right now. I like to say that cyber insurers, we can kind of lead a revolution for small and mid-sized businesses to really look at cybersecurity as a pillar of their business, right? Just as you look at human resources and sales, right? We really need to look at cybersecurity as something that every single entity needs to focus on. Because yes, you can get a cyber insurance policy. Yes, we can bail you out, but it's still an ugly process and nobody likes to get hacked and have to deal with that. So the better prepared you are for it, the less likely the costs are going to be with that event, and the less likely you are to be down for a long period of time.
I think that's really well said. Sign me up for the revolution. There's a good question in the chat here, which kind of goes into something we were going to talk about as well. So back to the forensics and selecting a vendor. So is it important for the insured to let the carrier know which vendor they want to use, or should the carrier pick which vendor should be used? How does that work?
Yeah, great question. So in my experience and based on our preference, we like to be the ones to pick the vendor. And really two reasons there. A, we're very familiar with these vendors, so we know how they operate, and our adjusters know how they operate. So that just ensures that the process is going to be a lot smoother. And then B, preferred rates, right? We funnel a lot of business to these vendors, so we're going to get everything cheaper. Not to say that you're getting cheap work, but you're just getting it cheaper because of the amount of volume we push to those vendors. There have been scenarios in the past where insureds want specific vendors. Those are usually the insureds that the nature of their business is kind of in the cybersecurity world. So they have a familiarity with how to do these things and what they want to do. Case by case, we can consider it. I usually get shut down on those requests for Evolve, but I would say for any cyber market, it does not hurt to ask. And you want to ask those questions before you have a claim. It's very inconvenient for both the insured and the insurer to have to try to figure out what vendor we're using to help mitigate an event while the event's going on, right? So if you have an insured that's like, oh, we have this IT forensic firm and we really love them, or we have this data breach attorney and we really love them, promote that to your cyber insurer. Make sure you run that by them ahead of time. How they would track that, I'm not sure, right? It could be in their claims management system. Maybe they have to throw it on there via endorsement, right? The biggest thing is you want to make sure when the incident happens, then the insurer knows, oh yeah, we're going to use these vendors. That's kind of a tough thing for us to manage, right? So again, we've found it more a little bit better to just keep it with the vendors that we're comfortable with to ensure as smooth a process as possible.
Yeah, I think that's a great peek behind the curtain for how the process works. And, I think that's consistent with how most other carriers would approach that situation. They do want you to work on their panel.
Mhm.
So shifting a little bit, you teased it a little bit, and it's definitely something that we wanted to talk about, and that's OFAC and how OFAC plays a role. So for the listeners, OFAC is the Office of Foreign Assets Control. But for what OFAC does and how they play a role or could potentially play a role in your ransomware claim, I will leave that to the expert, which is Anthony. So
Sounds good. Yep. So OFAC, Office of Foreign Assets and Control, or Assets Control, excuse me, they just administer and enforce various economic trade sanctions, right? And one of the newest ones is in regards to ransomware, where cyber insurers and insureds are not allowed to pay cyber threat actors or crime groups that are related to some sort of state or state sponsored, right? So when I say that, I'm more kind of talking about Russia or North Korea or China, right? So it's some sort of state sponsored crime group that's launching these ransomware attacks, and we don't want to pay them because we're just fostering the problem, right? The issue. So OFAC, when you have a ransomware payment, right? And let's say we negotiate it down and we're like, okay, we want to have the insured pay the ransom and then we'll reimburse them, right? We're going to do something called a ransom payment risk assessment, an RPRA. And that is in an effort to assist the insured in making an informed decision as to whether to pay a ransom. And the IT forensics team will provide the insured with that report, that ransom payment risk assessment. So the RPRA takes 3 inputs: a ransomware variant, a crypto wallet, and an extortion email. And it'll undertake a 3-phased analysis, which I'll dive into in a little bit more detail. That 3-phased analysis will culminate in a low, medium, or high probability of an applicable global sanction. So whether, hey, you're actually exposed. So if it's high, we're maybe going to recommend that we can't actually reimburse, or you guys shouldn't pay the ransom because it's going to expose you to a sanction from the UN, the EU, the UK, Australia, Canada, America, right? There's a lot of different terrorism designations out there. So those 3 phases. Phase 1 is a direct match. So the crypto wallet address and associated ransomware variants are checked against both the Dow Jones Factiva and Chain, and what's it called? Sorry, I'm reading notes here. Chainalysis KYT tools for a direct match. And the output from that phase is binary. So it's either a true match or not, yes or no, right? A lot of the times you're good. Phase 2, indirect match. So the crypto wallet address and associated ransomware variant is analyzed with that Chainalysis reactor tool to identify any known historic sanctions. The output from that phase would be a range between high, a direct match, medium, potential match, and low, no match. And then phase 3 is the threat intelligence. So the identified ransomware variant is further analyzed to ascertain any potential association with a sanction nexus within the threat intelligence sphere. So the output from that would be a range as well. So high, medium, and low, no match. So should the insured decide to pay, they would need to submit the associated costs, the ransom and associated processing fees to us for reimbursement. And again, that's where you transfer it over into a cryptocurrency via a third party. So in addition to that RPRA, we would designate a payment facilitation vendor. So they would have a due diligence sanction report as well that they would procure and make sure you're good to go. And then on all matters, we are going to request that the insured notifies law enforcement, again, just following the rules and guidelines that we have to. And then it goes without saying kind of that we always advise insureds that the payment of a ransom should always be the last resort after all other potential avenues have been fully explored. So to date, we have not had any of these tests come back and say, hey, it's high, you can't pay the ransom or you can't reimburse it, right? And there's a lot of stuff out there on the cyber carrier side where until it happens, we're not really 100% sure how we're going to react to it. And in talking to Tom ahead of this call, it sounds like a lot of other markets also haven't really gone into a world where, hey, it's actually coming back high, it probably is going to expose us to a sanction. Therefore, we're recommending you do not pay it. Now, what would happen if we recommend you do not pay it? The insured could still do that. They just may be exposing themselves to a sanction, but most likely we're going to try to exhaust all other options to try to remediate the event and get them back up and running if we can without paying the ransom, right? And that may mean rolling their systems way back to a time when the ransom wasn't there and they're going to lose a lot of data, right? And then we have to go in and rebuild a lot of data. That's very costly as well, and it's going to be covered up to the limit of their policy. So there'll be options to weigh, and there's definitely just going to be a conversation around that in terms of how you need to handle it and what's going to happen. So I realize that's kind of a lot to dive into, but Tom, if you want, I can provide the notes I received from the cyber claims manager and you can distribute those. I'm more than happy to share those. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great, Anthony. I think the purpose of including this discussion, and we are kind of going over time, so
Yeah, sorry.
we'll wrap up soon, but I think it's an important point. The reason that we included this in our discussion today about the claims process is because it's really to give you all a peek behind the curtain of what you may face. And it's not because we think that you're going to face this scenario where there's a sanctioned actor that's going to result in you not being able to pay. We think it's just because it's gonna come up. Basically, it's part of the claims process whereby there's going to be this OFAC check. The insurance carrier is going to explain to you what that is and why there's maybe a 24-hour delay between, hey, let's pay this ransom and let's go get the cryptocurrency. So yeah, it's just something to be aware of. And having those additional details, Anthony, that'd be great. We'll definitely keep those here. So we are on time here. If you had a question that we missed, I apologize. We'll respond individually, but thank you everyone for being here today. And thanks to Anthony once again for being our guest. And I'll look forward to seeing everyone for part 3 on April 4th. And you should be receiving an invitation very soon on that. So once again, thanks everyone and have a great day.
Thanks everyone.